Welcome to Shut Up and Sit. I'm Yedda a consciousness coach and consultant. I'm on a mission to bring mindfulness to the modern world. Each week, we will offer ancient healing practices, real-world examples, and the latest research in neurobiology and behavior change into fun conversation that invites you to wake up your highest self. Now, let's go shut up and sit. All right, welcome back, everybody. Yedda here. And by now, I'm excited. I'm always excited to be on the microphone and on my headphones. So even if you're just listening and not watching, I just love wearing these headphones. I love coming in to talk and to teach and to educate and empower and entertain you all. You have just me today, so hopefully that either excites you or it makes you at least curious. Where's she going to go and what rabbit hole is she going to take us down today? So welcome again to the show. I'm so excited, so grateful to be here. And I'm so grateful because we are now in chapter 7. Last episode, you were here with me and Eric, a longtime client and a dear friend of mine, talking about stress and how actually this work has benefited him to be able to manage his stress better and what that looks like for him as a leader and also as a father and a friend and a community member. It was so great talking to Eric. And so today I'm going to carry you a little bit deeper into chapter 7 on the title of the chapter actually is called Stress Less. And it's so important to me that we talk about stress as a society. I have a chapter or a section in this chapter about the stress statistics, and it literally says stress statistics that will stress you out. So I am going to review this with you in just a minute. But I wanted to dig deeper into stress so that you would understand the value and benefit. There was a very intentional process of putting these chapters and all of these teachable contents together in exactly this order. So I didn't talk about stress first and then put all the other pieces in place about thinking, feeling, behaving, and I did that for a very specific reason. We need to understand what's deeper underneath the stress. So if you remember way back in the beginning, and if you haven't started there, you might want to go back. We started this whole conversation, yes, with my personal story, but we started it with that very first chapter on why are you killing yourself? Our stress, our inability to deal with and manage our life's experiences cause us to actually create and have really unhealthy patterns of behavior, eating, drinking, and lots of other things that are literally killing us. And so you may or may not remember this, but my very first job, my very first career was actually in behavior change. And so as a health coach, a personal trainer, nutritionist, and literally a behavior change specialist, expert, whatever the certification is called, and really my undergraduate degree was all about understanding how does human behavior work? How do beliefs get built? How do behaviors get rewired, rewritten? Even actually 20 plus years ago, we didn't use language like that. We just learned about the behavior in the psychology conversation. And so all of this work is built on the foundation of understanding human behavior change. And as you've evolved through the work and the lessons and the chapters and the content I've been teaching you on each of these episodes, it really is building one on top of another. So we've built a really strong foundation. So now we can really get you to go a little bit deeper into understanding stress and what we can do in a state of stress or stress response. And so now that you know, when you go to eat the Twinkie, when you go to pick up the third or fourth or fifth drink, when you go to buy things that you don't have the money for, whatever outer thing you're doing to try to make your inner self feel better, usually there's a stress component that's under it. And so what we're going to dig into today, and I love this quote, it's in the beginning of chapter 7, and I just want to repeat it by Deepak Chopra, who's been one of my teachers, and he says, "The wounding becomes sacred when we are willing to release our old stories and to become the vehicles through which the new story may emerge into time." And we have a belief system even about stress. I have a great TED Talk in here from Kelly McGonigal, and she's phenomenal, very, very educational, fantastic speaker. And she talks about even a belief system around stress, that we all have different levels of stress that we operate at our best at. You know, one of my best friends, her stress level for being overwhelmed is very different than mine. And so we all have patterned behaviors and belief systems around stress. Now that you understand thoughts lead to feelings, feelings create behavior, when we're stressed out, we're not going to just attack the stress behavior. We're now going to get you to walk all the way back. And now that you've learned you're cultivating your shutting up and sitting practice, your mindfulness practice, you know that that's the bridge that helps you to stay engaged and stay online. But you're going to have moments of stress. You're going to handle stress differently than I am, than anyone else is. We all have different thresholds. We have different nervous systems. Remember those 4 components of being human? Every one of us handles and manages our stress differently and in different ways. So we have layers and layers here of patterns and belief systems and biology and all the aspects that make us who we are. And that's why these cookie cutter programs don't work, because you can't do what I did exactly the way I did it. You don't have the same components of being human that I do. And the people around you don't have the same components. So when we get into stress, it's a common theme that we've all experienced stress in our lives, but it's different things that stress us out. You might not get stressed out if I came to you today and said, hey, I want you to sit down and write me a 10-page paper on. I would get really stressed out on that. And so there are different things. Or if I said, hey, I want you to go stand up in front of the room and give a quick talk on the 4 components of being human, you would probably be in total overwhelm. And I would jump up and be like, yes, I'm all about that. So we have different strengths, but we also have different belief systems that are layered on top of those strengths of ours as being human. And so I want to really help you just go a little bit, like I said, a little bit deeper into understanding how the whole stress response is working in you. And I also want to talk to you on this lesson in particular about anger. Because anger is usually how most of us respond to our stress response. And I say usually, you might have a different way, but from an emotional space, there's something in the brain, and there are 2 words that we use in narrative coaching and narrative release, and they're the words resonance and dissonance. Resonance, all that means when you're in neurological resonance, it means that things are in alignment, they're working together. And when they're in dissonance, they're not in alignment, they're not connected, and they're not working together. And so when we get into a stress response, there's kind of a gauge there. And some of us, we can stay in resonance with a little bit of stress, a little bit more, a little bit more. And as we kind of move up and that dial kind of cranks up, wherever we lose our resonance and go into dissonance is directly correlated to who we are with our 4 components of being human. So you know my story if you've been listening and reading and participating in the online course. So growing up in a family that had a lot of dysfunction and a lot of abuse and addiction, my threshold for dissonance is pretty high. So it takes a lot in different areas. It takes a lot to get me to get disconnected. And then there are other areas in my life it doesn't take much at all. And so there are places when I walk into chaos, confusion, trauma, drama, disorder, my immediate response, my stress response is to go in and start making order out of the disorder. But that's what I learned in my human story growing up. So as a coach and a consultant, the messier your inner world and the messier your business or your team or your project or your consulting, questions that you have, actually, the better I can perform and actually help you produce the outcomes you want, because then my story and my strengths get to come in. But that level of stress for that chaos and disorder doesn't trigger me. However, for somebody else, it might trigger them. So I do tell this a lot to my clients. I'm like, look, if everything is going great in your life and it's time to just make the donuts and you just want somebody to come in and make the donuts with you, I'm not her, but I know a lot of people who can work with you when you're at that place. And so it doesn't mean I'm not open to helping people grow and evolve once they get all this work done and a strong foundation in place. But the type of work I do with clients at that level begins to evolve. So once we get the inner psyche cleaned up, that's what I tell my clients, especially my executive clients, and you can be a founder, not necessarily just an executive, but if you're in the business world, once we get the whole inner landscape cleaned up and you've learned all this work, then we can start with the actual outer work, which is your business, your teams, your strategies, etc. And so I'm just sharing that here so you really understand everyone's got value and everyone has different levels on their stress response. So now, when we move into this, and I was kind of looking into the chapter, and it's so sweet. I have a story in this chapter about when my son was born. And I think back, gosh, he just turned 24. And I think back, gosh, it feels like just yesterday. And in many ways, it feels like a lifetime ago. And the story that's in this chapter about him was when he was born, He was born premature. He had a lot of health issues from being premature, was in intensive care. And the stress response, I mean, me being pregnant, that stress response was hard for me. It was hard on him. When he was born, you can imagine having your child literally be blue, gurgling up blood bubbles and, like taken off in an ambulance to another hospital because the one we were in couldn't support him. It was really, really a traumatic and very emotionally hard time for me. And not only physically, but emotionally, wondering what's going to happen. And so I share this story in this chapter about stress because I remember when he did get out of the hospital and we brought him home and I was sitting there, we were in El Paso, Texas, and I'm holding this brand new little baby. He was only a few weeks old. And I literally, my brain went from holding this human being all the way, I went from like cradle to grave to my own death. And oh my God, how's he going to survive without me? In like a thought. And the waves of all of these thoughts and the stress response that I was in was really traumatic. And so I share that story opening in this chapter because there's something that's really important here when we think about stress. What triggers a lot of our stress is the unknown, what we don't know. And actually, there are two things on different sides of the coin. So it's the what we don't know that can trigger the stress response. And then it's also what we think we know and the expectations we create from what we think we know that causes the other level of stress. And so I was sitting in this situation where I just wanted to know everything about this little teeny human being's life and needed to know it all right then and there because there's this part of my brain just kind of flipped a switch and was like, I don't know what in the world am I doing with this human being? And so I went running next door to my neighbor. We were on a military base and I didn't know her very well. And Barb, if you're listening, hey girl. And I didn't know her and I went over there and ran knocking on her door. And I was like, I can't do this. I can't take care of this human being. I don't know how to be a mother. And I mean, I had this full-blown breakdown with this stranger. And she's got these permed blonde hair with a Philly accent, and green fingernails this long, and married to someone who looked like Mike Tyson. Seriously, literally looks like Mike Tyson. And I just had full-blown like freak out. And I was in such a stress response that I couldn't stop myself. I left my infant child next door and ran to a stranger's house and had full-blown freak out. And I share this story because she was like, oh, honey, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Of course, she went back. We got the baby. And she just really helped me to calm down. And the reason I share that story is for two reasons. First is you can't know everything. There's no way you could know every single aspect of everything. And when you get outside of the power of this present moment, you're either fantasizing about the future or you're literally regurgitating and doing an archaeological dig in the past. And I say that over and over and over again, because that's the power of mindfulness, this shutting up and sitting to bring you back to the present moment. And so what Barb did was, and it's a mindfulness technique. Nobody was using the word mindfulness 24 years ago that I knew of. She just brought me back to this moment. And she just held the baby. She talked to me. She was so sweet and so loving and just helped me to stay right here, right now with this baby. Of course, she had already had a couple of kids, and she just helped me understand that this is normal. But what she did was she got me out of all the questions and said, just come back right here. And we talked about, and we looked at this little human being and his clothes, and she just really got me to talk about all the phenomenal things about this little child that I had right here, right now, and not to worry about all the other moments that they would come. And so I give you that. That's the first reason. So we get way, way out ahead of ourselves. The second reason is when you're in a stress response, and I don't care if you're holding a brand new baby, if you're driving in traffic, if you've got a big project due at work, if you're in strife and struggle in your relationship, if you're dealing with finances, whatever it is that is triggering you, you have the power to come back to this present moment. And when we sit in this moment, we don't need to know. The unknown is something the mindfulness cultivates and helps us to be with, okay? So we come back to this moment and we don't get lost in the future and we don't get lost in the stories. And the other thing is when you're in a freak out moment, like whatever could freak you out, you cannot make great decisions until your brain comes back online, back to this moment. So you don't meditate in the middle of a stress response. That's going to be really hard because your brain and your biology are just like, everything's offline. So we want to get you to understand, first of all, I'm in a place of not knowing and or expectation. Second of all, if I could just come back to this moment, it might be taking a walk, taking a break, getting up from your desk, hanging up the phone, walking away from the computer, whatever it is, get out of the struggle that is causing you the stress response. Because when you're in it, you're not going to be able to get yourself back online until you get out of it. And that's why we always say we always feel better when we have a good night's sleep, or we have a conversation, or so you want to find people. And I've got some worksheets we're going to go over in a second too. And you can ask yourself these questions, or you can want to find people in your life that are safe spaces that can help walk you through stress and anger. Because if you don't have somebody to help you pattern interrupt, especially in the beginning, if I didn't have Barb in that moment, I couldn't have done it by myself, because I believed all of the thoughts that I was literally creating and that were creating me in that moment. And I love this. My meditation teacher says something really profound all the time. And when I first heard her say it, it just really stuck with me. And she said, don't believe anything you think. They're just thoughts, Yedda. They're going to come, they're going to go, they're going to come, they're going to go. They're going to regurgitate over and over and over again. You might have the same thought. And actually, most of us, if you go back to the thought chapter, most of us are just thinking the same shit over and over and over and over again. Very few of us are allowing space and freedom to create new thoughts. So this is where I tie in. The mindfulness, again, brings us back to the present moment. And once the brain calms down and gets us back online, and we're out of the negative emotion, out of the anger, out of the anxiety, the fear, and we can come back to a calm, cool space, what happens is we buy ourselves a little bit of freedom in between thoughts, in between the response in our body, and we calm back down and we get the nervous system re-engaged. And it's really important to do that. So I want you all to hear that, because we are all going to deal with stress in our life. And like I said, we're all hardwired for it. When you get to that TED Talk at the end of this module too, if you're on the online course, you're going to have a great link to go watch that TED Talk. But again, just knowing everyone handles stress differently, but I should say actually I'm working on and instead of but. And if we practice mindfulness and we shut up and we sit down in a calm, cool-blooded state, what happens is we are building the neurological pathways and the patterns and the habits to stay engaged longer, so we don't fly off the handle and get angry as quick. That's one of the tremendous benefits of shutting up and sitting, is being able to keep things engaged and online. So watch the TED Talk, great information in there. And we're all going to face demands, like I said. And she talks about in that talk that, there's a certain level of stress that actually inspires us to take action, to overcome fear, to do things. It's finding that right dial for you. Where is that threshold for you of just enough stress to propel and push you, but not so much that you have either complete shutdown or freak out or whatever. And mindfulness helps you to sit with that and to be in that dialogue with yourself. And so before we get into some of those questions I mentioned, I'm going to read you some of the stress stats that will totally stress you out. But I want you to know you are not alone. 77% of people regularly experience physical symptoms caused by stress. 77%, you all. Actually, the latest research is that 90% of all primary care physician visits are directly correlated to stress. And by now you know our thoughts, right? They go into our body. The energy of the thought in motion creates the emotion and literally changes the chemical structure of the cell. So I'm going to remind you, positive thoughts create positive energy and motion through the body, which creates positive cellular and hormonal and chemical things to happen in the body, which produces healthy behaviors. The exact opposite. Negative thoughts create a negative energy in motion, which then create all the cortisol and all of the things that actually tear down the health of the cells and literally cause you to want to do things to harm yourself. That's the way this works. So that's why stress is causing up to 90% of our visits to the doctor. Next one, 33% of people regularly experience psychological symptoms caused by stress. It means 1 in every 3 are dealing with severe psychological stress. You walk around today, 1 out of every 3 people are really suffering and struggling psychologically. 48% of people feel their stress has increased in the last 5 years. And I want to give you one little caveat. When I wrote this book and we pulled these stats, this was pre-COVID. The numbers since COVID have skyrocketed, okay? So I'm reading to you when things were what we would call quote unquote normal in the world, our stress stats and our mental health, and it's gone up exponentially. 73% of people regularly experience psychological symptoms caused by stress. 48% report lying awake at night because of stress. 54% of people report stress causes them to fight with others. 76% of people cited money and work as their leading cause of stress. 60% of employees are so unhappy in their current job they would prefer a new career. And 87% of workers are emotionally disconnected from their workplace and are less likely to be productive. Now, again, just remind you, that was before. And usually in health data, when we look back in health behavior, we are always at least 2 years behind in data. And so these numbers we know have drastically changed because it's 2021. In 2020, it was a total shit show. We had a pandemic, we had political uprising, racial divide. We could go on and on down the list. These numbers have just gotten higher, is my point. And it says in here, every unhappy employee is 10% less productive, which impacts a business's bottom line. And why is that important? So whether you work in corporate or not, actually the result is $300 billion per year is what it costs employers in stress-related healthcare and missed work. Not to mention, we're all miserable when we're stressed out. So I want you to hold on to just understanding, A, you're not alone. B, we have an epic problem right now in our society, and I can't think of anything easier, faster, and more immediate that is not pharmaceutical. Okay, you might go, yeah, there might be some things out there faster than shutting up and sitting down and learning to be with what's going on inside of you and getting yourself out of the victim thoughts and language and behavioral patterns so that you can become the deliberate creator, which I call the victor of your own life. So we're not victims. I don't believe that. We have choices we can make. We're just on some old patterns and habits and loops and all of that. And you're going to learn more about that in the coming episodes. But this is the thing about mindfulness. We wake up. When we shut up and sit, we wake up to what's going on inside of us. And so we can become more awake, aware, and available to what's happening inside of me. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I saying what I'm saying? Why am I lashing out the way I'm lashing out? Why am I managing my emotions the way I am? And so the stress isn't something that someone's doing to you. It's the ability now for you to use this information in this chapter to wake up and ask yourself, why am I getting angry? Why am I getting stressed out? What's happening? And what I think you'll find, and this is in the chapter 2, and I was just telling Robin this before we started this episode, I have a quote in here and it says, hell is other people. And that is the truth. And I say this right here. I say every single person I've ever worked with or talked to has had at least one thing in common. When asked what single thing in life stresses them out, the answer is always, always, always the same. I'm not kidding you guys. And I'm reading right from my own words. Other people. It's their bosses, their coworkers, their spouses, their parents, their in-laws, their neighbors, their kids. The mailman, the anybody. The list goes on and on and on. And all of the things I do in community, I even think about this. I'm actually on my homeowners association board, and I have lots of friends who give me a hard time about that. And they're like, why would you want to do that? And because I want to put my skills to use, not just for the people that pay me to help them, but I want to put my skills to use. And that really my whole job. And when I do volunteer on boards and out in the community is I'm a bridge. I'm that collaborator. I kind of sit at the crossroads. I do this work for a living, but even when I'm not getting quote unquote paid or having, some professional exchange occur, my job and role is to help people who don't know this work to wake up and teach them as much as I can in little doses that what they're really upset about is either an expectation or an unknown about something outside of their control, which is other people's behavior. So if you haven't gotten it yet, doing this work with me and listening, you can't control anyone's behavior but your own. So if you're upset that your husband didn't give you a compliment because you looked pretty, or you're upset because your boss didn't tell you how great the work was, or you're upset because your friends didn't call you back, or you're upset because your kids really throw temper tantrums at bed at night and the kids fight. And if you're upset because your parents aren't giving you the attention that you want, we could just go down the list. Guess what? You're never going to get them to give you what you want by putting all your attention on trying to focus their behavior. So this is where the rubber really meets the road. Coming back in and saying, And I did this the other night with my own narrative. I literally am thinking about the example I just gave you about the woman, getting myself ready for dinner and doing my hair and getting dressed and having this big party for my sister's birthday and feeling like, gosh, I feel great. I look great. Everything in life is great. We're going to have this great event for my sister, and showing up, and my partner showing up and not saying one word, not one word. And here's the beauty, not, hey, babe, you look really great. Here's the beauty when you manage your own mind and you master your own behavior and aspirations. I literally, as I get dressed now, I look in the mirror and I think, I'm doing this for me. And if nobody else acknowledges how I feel, how I look, and what's working on this presentation that I'm taking out into the world, that's okay. Because we set up dangerous expectations when everything we do is to get somebody else to do something to us or for us or with us. And when you get to this work of mindfulness and you can manage your own stress response and you can manage the unknown and the expectations, you can sit at that center of yourself, which is already whole, that says, I am whole, I am beautiful, I'm strong, I'm enough, I'm capable, all the things you want the world to tell you, you cultivate when you shut up and sit and go within. And then when you go out in public, you can still be aware of it. But if somebody walks into a room and expects people to think, oh my gosh, you look great and you're the best and thank you so much, and they don't get that, immediate stress response goes off, and then all this anger comes because then we start projecting shit out onto other people because they didn't do what we wanted. It's the same in the workplace. It's the same with projects. Your whole work in this process is to learn to be your source of everything. And when I say that, I'm talking about self-referral, being able to go within and give yourself compliments, going within and giving yourself accolades. You did a great job, Yedda. Way to go. Giving yourself the freedom and the space to take it easy on yourself, to offer yourself compassion, to entertain and take yourself out to dinner. So when we can cultivate a relationship with ourselves and sit with, oh, look at me creating an expectation. That's a wake-up call for me to actually do that for myself. Oh, look at me starting to tippy-toe into the unknown. Oh, a wake-up call for me to shut up and sit down and go, you know what? I'm not supposed to know that yet. That moment's not hidden. It's not here yet. And so that's why I say hell is other people. We've given so much power to other people to be responsible for our health and well-being and our happiness and our joy and our sense of self-worth. We've lost and we've forgotten that actually resides inside of us. And so when we get our behavior and our focus off of other people, what happens is that's what true empowerment is. And then when you show up as a whole person, you're able to give from your overflow versus coming in half-cocked, half-full, half-whatever, and expecting people to give you what you're still missing in yourself. And ultimately, that's the number one thing I help people with in human behavior, hands down, in business, in relationships, in finance, in community, is finding the power within themselves. And you all are learning how to do that as you go through this work. So I know that there are tons of benefits to reducing stress. I don't need to read that. And of course, in this chapter, as I'm looking through it, you've already heard Eric's testimony in the last episode. Mindfulness does help us to reduce a lot of stress, but that's because it calms down the nervous system. It activates theta brainwave, if you remember from chapter 4. So when theta brainwave is active, neurological systems are all online. We're not stressed out. That's why when people do all these mindfulness practices, people will come up and say, how did you calm down so much? Yes, yoga was a part of it, but the yoga, any of the theta brainwave activities, the meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, all of these that are out there, and the list goes on, they all impact the pattern interruption so that you can create a new habit. So when we get into mindfulness, that's why we aren't as stressed out if we've been practicing for a while, because we've cultivated a physiological change in our brain. We've cultivated a habitual new pattern, a way of showing up, a different way of going out into the world. And anger doesn't become our first response anymore when we've been cultivating and learning how to shut up and sit. So I want to remind you about anger and how it affects your health. And I've got this in the chapter because this is really important as well, I think. And we already know that anger causes high level of cortisol. And I talked about all of the other different chemicals in the brain earlier in the book. But I want you to know that more than 1 in 10 people say that they have trouble controlling their anger. 1 in 10. Okay. And again, remember these statistics were pre-COVID and pre-2020. So those numbers are going up. More than 1 in 4 people say they worry about how angry they are sometimes and how that makes them feel. 1 in 5 people say that they've ended a relationship or friendship with someone because of how they behaved when they were angry. Can anybody recall a moment where you cut off a friend or a friend cut you off because you had some disagreement? And I don't know about you, I still have those moments where I dip back and I'm like, gosh, I really wish I could just go back and pick that moment back up and heal that relationship, because anger in the body is just like pouring acid on metal. It produces cortisol, and that cortisol just eats at the tissues in your body. The anger also eats at the connection that you have with other human beings. Next one says 64% of people either strongly agree or agree that people in general are getting angrier. Again, this was before the riots and before everything. We saw anger at the front and center stage of the world in 2020, especially here in the United States. Fewer than 1 in 7 of those people who say they have trouble controlling their anger have sought some type of help for that anger. And then lastly, 58% of people wouldn't know where to seek help if they needed help with an anger problem. And that, to me, that's more than half the people that we're dealing with. They wish they knew where they could seek some help. And the truth is, we can all seek help. We can go within and we can shut up and sit and start with ourselves. And when we start with ourselves, that's where we start to have a ripple effect on others. And so in my personal story, anger was a huge issue for me. I learned a lot of patterns, to me that I say this even still to my clients, is the fastest way to resolution is usually confrontation with me. I've just cultivated now the awareness of knowing how to break down those brick walls in people's psyches and in their business, but I do it now with a loving kindness, compassion, and foundation of things that are more about equanimity. And equanimity is really kind of a balancing, being able to hold multiple things at one time and not get triggered by them. And so it's taken me several years to cultivate that whole space around not having the anger come out initial and be my first response. But that's what mindfulness has allowed me to do. My shutting up and sitting down practice. Every time, and now years ago I might have blown up and then come back an hour or two later and sat down and worked with it, or day or two or week or whatever. But ultimately, the more we shut up and sit, and the closer we get to the recovery time, the closer you're getting to building wiring that's literally going to allow you to change in the actual stress response. Are you going to choose anger, or are you going to choose something different? So for me, I put a lot of questions together in this chapter, and these are all from a lot of experts that are out there. But, questions to help you really dive into understanding your anger better. I had to really befriend her. I had to have that anger sit across from me, and sometimes it was red hot, on fire. And like you've heard me say, doing backflips out the window, throwing hand grenades and middle fingers and F-bombs on the way. And eventually, as I would sit with her more and more and more and more, I would understand what she really wanted and needed. And that's a whole other conversation we're going to get into another episode around ego. But I put these questions together. They're in the book. If you don't have it, you can get a copy. If you're in the online course, it's in the PDF there. And by the way, you can just go to suascommunity.com if you want to get enrolled in the course and get the immediate digital version of all of this. And so when I look at this and you look at these questions, it takes time. I mean, if you're going to unravel anger and you're going to really understand, first of all, is my anger coming from an unknown? Is my anger coming from an expectation I've set up that is not being met? Those are usually our first two tracks to get into. And then you can drill into, where does the anger show up in your body, paying attention. There is a mind-body connection. Sometimes we find our anger by starting with the physical body. And some of us start by finding our anger in our mental body, in our thoughts. So there's lots of ways to go through it. And I'm not going to read all those questions to you today. I just want you to know that this takes self-inquiry. If you want to get to the place where you can cultivate self-management, and one of our next episodes coming up, actually, I'm interviewing another client who literally was the Hulk, and you'll hear his story. Stuart's coming up on our next show, and Stuart talks about how the Hulk was who he thought he was, and his anger was his identity. And now to see somebody literally let go of the anger and show up with kindness and calm and present moment awareness. And you'll hear his story, which is pretty profound. It's just evidence that this work does work, and it can be done by anybody. And so these questions that are just further in here, and I'm looking through as I'm talking to you all, just to help you to fine tune, getting in touch with what's creating the anger. And then, one of the questions that's in here is, in this situation right here, right now, and I ask myself this a lot, and this is what I learned when I put this together, was, how is this situation going to be viewed 5 months from now, 5 years from now? Is it really worth me destroying my health and my life and my relationships right here in this anger response, when in 5 months, 5 years from now, I'm going to look back and I won't even probably remember it. And so the anger is like a shotgun, and people are like, I sometimes just got to blow up. Well, yeah, sometimes if you think about just blowing up at people, it's like firing a shotgun. You can't take that back. You hurt and harm a lot of people with your anger. And so I've got a lot of in-depth questions, and I'm not going to get into all of these, but I do want you to know you've got some resources here. And back to that last statistic, over half the population is looking for help on anger, and they just don't know where to go. And I'm telling you, there's time out for anger worksheets in here. There's understanding triggers for anger worksheets in here for you guys, listing your anger management techniques that are available to you, getting in touch with how you express your anger. It's all in here. And I really want you to go deep and do this work, because the more information you have about your anger, and the easier it'll get for you to go, oh, that's just part of what I learned. I learned when we get angry, we yell. I learned when we get angry, we do these things. And I'm thinking about something before we wrap up that really in my family, and I actually wanted to ask my dad, my stepdad, who I call dad, that raised me, to come in and do this episode. And he's really healed and grown and really overcome a lot of his anger management and techniques that he used growing up with me as a kid. And our relationship is really great now. And so when I did ask him, but he was like, I don't know what a podcast is all about or an online course yet. I'm not interested in any video. I don't know. I'll come watch you film one. Which is fine. But I remember when we were kids, this might sound bizarre to you, and I am going to call him out a little bit. When my parents would fight and argue, so two things. One is my mom would threaten to leave. And when she would threaten to leave, she'd get us kids and she'd throw us in the car. And then my dad, the car wouldn't start. And my dad would be standing in the doorway holding like a part to the car engine, like the distributor cap or like these cables or spark plugs, or I don't know what it was. And I tell people this story now and they're like, what? Like your dad took parts of the car so that you couldn't leave? I'm like, yeah, that's how my family fought. What did your parents do? And they were like, we don't even know what that means. And so then I have friends who are like, yeah, I can tell you, not only did my parents do that, I can one up you. And so we have varying ways that we learned patterned ways to show up. And so that was, my parents were not aware at that time. They weren't conscious. They were playing out their own patterns of behaviors that they learned. And then when we're in the constant stress response and anger is our constant go-to, I just got patterned with a lot of anger techniques. And so when I went down inside and kind of thought about and answered these questions in the worksheets, I was able to connect with that and go, I just learned some really not healthy ways. And when we are in a place of survivor mindset, we do anything and everything at all costs to try to keep things the same. And mindfulness says nothing is ever going to stay the same. Everything is constantly changing and in a flux. And remember, we talked about energy and impermanence. It's always evolving and moving. And so our ego reaches in this finite state to hold everything really tight and says, no, don't leave, don't do this, don't do that, and wants to make sure it can control and know as much as possible all the time. So our work here in this chapter of bridging the mindfulness and coming back into stress now is to help you understand, yes, shutting up and sitting down will help you unravel those patterns and those behaviors, and it'll also help you to rewrite and rewind back to and respond and bring out new ways of being in the world. And then the other thing I want to tell you, and I don't know, I might get a call from my mom after this one, but it's really interesting. When I was really battling with my anger, and I was really angry in my divorce, and I would text relentlessly angry messages to my now ex-husband, which I like to call wasband, because ex doesn't sound very kind in my words, so my wasband. And now when I think about sitting down and having to unravel, like, I would just blow up his phone, and I would, and even, in my current relationship early on, I would blow up his phone if I didn't get what I wanted. And I had to sit down and go, why is that? And so I know I'm a good person, and I know everybody watching and listening to this, you're all good people. You have patterns and you have ways of showing up when you get stressed out that just aren't serving you. And so I sat down and I remembered when we were kids and my parents would fight, my mom would take a tape recorder down to, we had this big round wooden kitchen table with a big little opening underneath of it that we'd put all the placemats. And my mom would put a tape recorder down there when her and my dad would argue, and she would actually record the fights. And there's a reason why I'm saying this, and it's not to harm or hurt anybody's feelings, but I want you guys to hear this. She would play back. Remember, my father would blow up and he would argue. And so she would then play back the tape later because he couldn't remember. When we're in a sense of rage and anger, we literally do lose our shit. And then when he would come back online, she would replay the tape. And so I realized my constantly rehashing the situation and not being able to let it go in my texting had some of that pattern of bringing back the moment over and over. She would rewind and play, rewind and play, rewind and play. And I realized, I need to kind of come to terms with, and it's not a blame game. My parents were doing the best they could, and my mother was just trying to get somebody to acknowledge and hear and see. And so what I realized in my own healing and my own stress response and anger management was, I know where this comes from. And so I did my work in shutting up and sitting down and going back to that moment in the kitchen, witnessing that real dramatic and dysfunctional way of being in a relationship, and did my own healing with people that would help me walk through those moments and those memories to release those old stories, like I said with the opening quote, and to learn how to show up and write new ones. So every time I would get out the phone, I would then actually imagine I was putting the tape player out and hitting rewind, and then, because I would say the same crap over and over, mean and awful, hurtful things. And I realized I was on both sides of that tape player story. I was the one creating the tape, and then I was the one that would be rewinding and keep playing the tape over and over again. And so that really freed me. And I share these really intimate stories with you, and I share these techniques to get free from that anger. I never thought that was possible. But it was understanding, thinking, feeling, behaving. It was understanding my triggers when I get stressed out. It was understanding that I was able to shut up and sit down and do that work to go within and let those memories come up and be with them and work through them. And yes, I had guides and teachers along the way, but that's why I created this whole course and program, is because I want you to have those same guides and resources. So as we move out of the stress chapter, you've got a lot of work here that you can certainly dig into, and we're going to moving into our next episode that's going to be coming up. We're going to move into a deeper understanding about that habit loop. You're going to hear from a wonderful client I mentioned, Stuart. He's going to tell you about his story to healing in this journey of doing this work with me, and how he actually was able to not just let go of the Hulk, but integrate parts of the Hulk back into his personality that did serve him, and how he was able to let go of some habits and then create new ones by doing this work, this shut up and sit work. So, man, I just love talking about this stuff, and I hope that it's helpful and of value to you, and that you know that you're not alone. If you're stressed out, there are ways that you can work through this. I'm here to help you. You can shut up, you can sit down. Eventually, once you shut up and sit and do this work, you can learn to stand up and be, to stand up and speak, and ultimately stand up and lead in your own life. And I really look forward to helping you continue on this journey. So I'm going to see you on the next episode. We're going to come back into Chapter 8 on habits with Stuart. And until then, hey, if you get stressed out today, just do the best you can, but come back to the moment. And remember, if you don't know, and if you've set up an expectation, that's part of being human. All you have to do is come back to this moment. Even if for a millisecond, it'll bring you back online. I'll see you on the next episode. Have a wonderful day. Take care.
May you know goodness. May you know peace. May you know contentment. May you be